All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started now. On behalf of the Nar Initiative, welcome to the third of a five-part series on amenity migration entitled Boomtown, Amenity Migration in the Rural West and the Rise of the Zoomtown. My name is Jordan Smith, and I'm the director of the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism up here at Utah State University. I'm going to start off today and give you a little bit of background about the Gnar Initiative and explain a little bit more about this particular amenity migration series before we go ahead and launch into the discussion today. So if you are unfamiliar with the Gnar Initiative, the acronym GNAR stands for Gateway and Natural Amenity Region Initiative. And who we are an extension program based out of the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism at Utah State University. And what we envision the Gnar Initiative to be is a hub of researchers, practitioners, and community members. We have three pillars that really define what it is that we do. Those three pillars are research, education, and capacity building. So we want to develop a better understanding of the unique challenges of gateway communities through targeted research, by sharing lessons learned with practitioners and students through our educational efforts, and by increasing the capacity of gateway communities in any ways that we can, providing them with specific tools and resources that allow them to overcome the development challenges that are so common for Gnar communities. We are led by a volunteer core team and a larger steering committee that represent the diverse viewpoints that are present within the unique world of gateway communities. Our core team consists of Danya More, who is a professor down at the University of Utah. She's the founder of the Gnar Initiative. Jake Powell, who is also on the call today. Jake is the lead of the Gnar Initiative here at Utah State. Myself as a core team member, and then Liz Soja, who is the Gnar coordinator. The Gnar Initiative is really meant to be a resource, not just for gateway community planners, managers, elected officials, but also for academics, nonprofit organizations. Like I mentioned, it really is envisioned to be a connecting organization that puts all of these organizations in touch with one another and allows gateway communities to learn from what one another is doing. The Gnar Initiative has always been envisioned as a unifying common location for people interested in gateway community issues to share their insights, add to the conversation, and build upon the body of knowledge surrounding planning and resilience in the special places that many of you call home. One of the many ways that you can get involved with the Gnar Initiative is just to stay abreast of the new information that we have coming out. I think Jake is going to put in the chat now a link to a sign up form where you can sign up for the Gnar Initiative Newsletter. We promise not to spam you too much with emails. We realize everybody is about as zoomed out and has as much screen time as they could possibly want at this point. So we'll make sure that the stuff that we are sending out is really of value and is useful to you. So check out that link if you're interested in learning more about what we have on deck within our initiative. You can also join our leadership team. You can contact Jake, who I mentioned is the lead of the Gnar Initiative here at Utah State, if you're interested in either becoming a member of the steering committee, or if you have resources, information, tools that you think other folks in gateway communities around the West could benefit from. We have a toolkit, a compilation of associated resources that we think are useful to all the planning and development challenges that go on in gateway communities, and those are hosted on our website. So if you have any resources that you think could be of help to other gateway communities, feel free to send them along, and we'll make sure that they get posted up there. One of the things that I should mention right up front is that the Gateway Natural Amenity Region Initiative is a collaborative effort, and we have received some gracious support both through funding and through some in-kind support from a variety of different sponsors. We've received funding from the North Face Explore Fund, the National Park Service's Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, the Wallace Stegner Center at the University of Utah, as well as the College of Architecture and Planning, also at the U. This particular series, the Amenity Migration webinar series, is funded by the Utah Outdoor Partners. And the Mountain and Resort Town Planners Summit has also been gracious in advertising the effort. Frontier Forward has also sponsored AICP continuing education credits as part of this series. So if you are looking for APA credits as part of this series or for participating in this series, you can check out the link that Jake is going to share in the chat box with you now. So a little bit more about this series in particular, the Amenity Migration series. We've watched over the past few months as COVID-19, social unrest, and the lockdown orders have really led to a paradigm shift in our ability and our willingness to work from the offices. And so we have this new world that we're living in, and much of that is driven by this ability to work from anywhere. And as a result, we've seen this new phenomenon, or maybe a resurgence of a phenomenon, in amenity migration, where people are wanting to live in the places that they recreate, in the places that they actually want to spend all their time. And that's led to a whole bunch of new challenges for gateway communities. And the focus of the discussion today will really provide these gateway community leaders an opportunity to share their insights of what's going on in these communities. And so we can hear kind of firsthand many of the challenges that they're working through and the solutions that they've found to be most successful, and the things that they are considering as they move forward through the pandemic, through an election, and through an amazing process of in-migration or amenity migration that we're seeing now. So to give you an idea of what we have covered so far in this series, stop sharing my screen for a second. Looking back in the first of the Amenity Migration series, we did cover the broad challenges and issues that are faced by gateway communities. Dr. Danya Mori at the University of Utah shared some of her recent research. That research is highlighted on our website if you want to check it out. 2 weeks ago, we had leaders from the Western Rural Development Center, the USDA Economic Research Service, Headwaters Economics, and Middlebury College all talk about the past trends in amenity migration across the West. And really what we want to focus on today is connecting you with gateway community leaders from across the West and allowing you to interact and to hear their dialogue about what they're facing right now, the challenges that they're going through, and what's been successful over the past several months for them. When we get towards the end, I'm going to highlight a couple of the sessions that we have lined up to finish out this session, or to finish out the Amenity Migration series. So if you want to check out more about those and you don't stick around till the very end of the webinar, keep in mind that we do have 2 more webinars planned after this. So a couple more final notes, just to kind of give you an idea of Zoom etiquette and what to expect. This session is being recorded, so we can later post it on the Institute's website, and that other gateway communities that are not able to participate right now can actually learn from the discussion that we have. All of the information that we collect in the chat is going to be anonymized. If you share anything in the chat that you think is going to be useful for other participants, it's going to be anonymized, so don't worry about sharing anything that's too confidential. Your participation in the series is informed consent. We may use some of the information that is collected and some of the data that is shared on the Gnar website and in future publications that we develop as part of the Gnar Initiative. So if you have any concerns about that, feel free to reach out to us and let us know. All right, so I'm going to get into it now. We're going to have about 60 minutes of discussion amongst the panelists, and we want this session to be really interactive, where the panelists can kind of jump off of each other's answers and have an interactive discussion. If you have questions that you would like asked of the panelists, we can do that through the Q&A dialog box that if you don't have that open already, it's at the bottom of your screen. So if you do have questions that you would like asked of the panelists, just open up that dialogue, type them in there. Jake and Liz and myself will facilitate those questions and make sure that they get asked as the discussion rolls along. If you have anything else that you think would be of value to all the participants on the call today, just feel free to type it in the chat. If you do have anything, make sure that your chat dialogue there is set to all panelists and participants. So you'll see a little blue box at the bottom of your chat dialogue that says all panelists. You want to change that to all panelists and attendees, then everybody will get that message. Let's start off with a little bit of just sharing about how many people we have on the call today. We had about 200 people registered for the webinar, so it's a really good turnout. If you could, in that chat box, type in the Gateway community that either you represent or the Gateway community that you are particularly interested in or understanding more about how they're dealing with amenity migration challenges. So this will just give us an idea of who's represented on the call today. So go ahead and type that in, and then go ahead and enter it. Lots of responses coming in from all over the West, Springdale, Green River, British Columbia. We have an international focus now in the Nar Initiative, apparently. We are well represented all over the continent. So this is just a good to see how many people we have represented and where they're coming from. It's great to see this diversity in the participants today. So I'm going to start off by introducing our panelists. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce you by title, and then hoping that you can unmute yourself and give you a little bit more background on yourself. Everybody is here to listen to me talk about you. Might as well represent yourself. So we'll start off with Ray. Ray Brown is the Executive Director of Sanders County Community Development Corporation in Montana. Ray, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure. Thanks for the invite. About me, we moved up here from Arizona in 1992, Thompson Falls. I was 14 years old and I hated my parents. We lived in a cabin with no electricity, no running water. But it ended up being one of the greatest experiences of my life. And I grew to love this community. I had an opportunity to come back and do what I'm doing now. So it's just funny how the world works sometimes. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ray. Next, we'll jump over to Kaden Figgins. Excuse me, Kaden. Kaden, you're the Executive Director of Development for Garfield County. That's Garfield County, Utah. If you're not familiar with Garfield County, Utah, it's about smack dab in the middle of the state. So, Kaden, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here. So I'm actually from Panguitch, and I live in Panguitch now. That's where the county offices are. Born and raised here, met my wife in high school here in Panguitch, and then we went on to Dixie State University in St. George, Utah, and graduated in 2017 and came back here. And I was lucky enough to land this position. I've been in this position now for about 2 years. And yeah, as you mentioned, Jordan, Garfield County, 5,000 square miles. We're dealing with, 92-ish% of the lands managed by the federal government and about 4% private. And so it's difficult at times, to develop, but we like the challenge, and we obviously like what we have here. We're one of the only counties that we're aware of in the world, let alone in the nation, that have portions of 3 national parks. Not to mention the Glen Canyon NRA and also the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. So I love where I'm at, and I'm here to stay.
Great, thanks, Kaden. Pete, we'll jump over to you next. Pete is the mayor of Jackson, Wyoming, a small little town some people might have heard of before.
Doesn't feel so small these days. I'm Pete. I've been in Jackson about 20 years. grew up in a military family, bounced around, was in the Army myself, college dropout, moved out there to ski and do the ski bum lifestyle, and did all the construction work and service industry work that comes along with that, and then decided to run for mayor about 5 years ago. So I don't have a particular area of expertise other than what I've learned in the last 4 years, but I've learned some interesting things.
Great, thanks, Pete. We're great to have you represent Jackson on the call today. Next, we'll jump over to Emily, also from another little town you might have heard of, Moab. Emily, you're the mayor there. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Let's see, fun facts about me. Grew up in Ohio, turned 18, headed west. Went to Clemson University, back to South Carolina, Clemson University for graduate school. And my master's thesis was environmental attitudes and behaviors among whitewater recreationists. Landed a job with Bryce Canyon as an interp ranger out of grad school. I lived in Tropic. Yeah, Garfield. But that also fell in love with a guy and a place, and headed over to Moab. Not knowing what I was going to be really when I grew up, but Moab to me was like anything's possible. And I've had several jobs since moving here, but am currently the mayor of Moab, and loving every moment of it. But this has been a very difficult year to be a leader, that is for sure. But with all the challenges, there's also been a lot of lemonade made from the lemons of this pandemic. So I'm looking forward to sharing some lemonade today.
Thanks, Emily. And we'll round it out with Aaron Qualls. Aaron, you're the Planning and Community Development Director for the city of Sound Point, Idaho. Thanks for joining us, Aaron.
Thanks for having me. Although I had a lot of old family from the southern part of Idaho, I was kind of an early adopter to the Zoomtown migrator back in 2006. That was before I think Zoom existed. I was doing something completely different when I arrived in Sandpoint, and the first question I asked was, what's my upload and download speed? One thing led to another, and I ended up going back to school for a master's degree in urban and regional planning, served on the planning commission, city council, and ultimately ended up as in my current role as planning and community development director.
Great. Thanks so much, Aaron. This is a rock star panel. I'm really excited to have everybody on today. Let's go ahead and get started with this discussion. Pete, we can start with you. You lead a community that is arguably at the peak or apex of this gateway and natural amenity region trajectory of development. The town's known worldwide for being on the doorstep of 2 U.S. national parks, being located in the heart of North America's largest intact ecosystem. So when it comes to amenity migration, is the phenomenon of amenity migration still being experienced within Jackson? Or is it largely an issue that the smaller towns surrounding Jackson are now dealing with?
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself there. I think I got it. Yeah, we're definitely in the middle of it right now. I think some of the bedroom communities around us are dealing with it as well, maybe more because of the people who are taking an opportunity and at a spike in the market to kind of cash out and get out and then move over and take that problem to Victor or Alpine. But I mean, the stories of folks that are moving to town and buying houses sight unseen. My best friend sold his house to somebody who had never been to Jackson and who spent $4 million in buying the house and saw it for the first time when he got there. So we're seeing a lot of that. At the same time, we've seen over the last year and a half, it's really the number of houses that have been scraped and rebuilt has been going through the roof. So those things are flying off the shelves, and that means that people are, the developers are feeling good about buying more of those. I don't have any hard data on what that has done to our housing market in terms of price acceleration, but there's nothing on the market, and people are bidding for any older house that comes up. It's been tough. We've had an immense amount of visitors this summer. a lot of the restaurants and hotels, I think, had some of their busiest, the hotels certainly, and some of the restaurants have been saying they've had their busiest summer in a long time. So there's been quite a bit of pressure on the town to provide services. At the same time, we get a lot of the county and the town share tax revenue out of the national parks. Yellowstone closed most of their lodging. We've lost a lot of that money over the summer. And so even though we had this bumper crop year of tourists, we have been falling behind in revenue because most of our revenue in town is from sales tax. So it's been providing services for these folks while also watching our housing, affordable housing plan get further and further in the red as far as property values going. It's been tough. And I don't see it really stopping. I think companies are starting to understand that they don't have to, you don't have to be in the office. You can work remotely, and people are looking at places like Jackson, and I'm sure where a lot of you folks live as well.
Thanks, Pete. To kind of follow up on that, can you tell us a little bit more about what really is driving the amenity migration phenomenon in Jackson right now? I've had some anecdotal discussions with folks in and around kind of the region up there, and there's been a surprising amount of stories that I've heard of folks internationally buying up land and property and second homes, third homes, fourth homes in and around Jackson. Is the amenity migration and the people that you're seeing move in, are they primarily US residents? Is it people that are now moving out of like urban centers, or is there much of this international development pressure as well?
It's probably a combination of both. And I don't, this isn't my crowd, so I'm not really sure. These aren't folks that I've talked to a lot. I'd say that, generally the things that drive migration to Jackson are, we don't have a state income tax. So, when you're moving from a high tax jurisdiction to Wyoming, you can often save enough money to pay for that house that you're buying or the house that you're developing. And I think coupled right now with a really low interest rate environment, it's becoming, it's becoming an attractive proposition. And we have been for some time known across the world as a destination to go to. There's just a lot of pressure. I think we're one of the top places that people think of when they think of getting out of the city and going to the mountains to escape a pandemic and go and be able to live somewhere where you have that center for the arts and that kind of cosmopolitan feel at the same time. So.
Well, yeah, thanks, Pete. And Emily, you share a lot of the same challenges as Pete. I think of, if you think of probably the two main cities that people think of as your typical gateway communities, they're Jackson and Moab. Moab seems to be the poster child for a lot of the development challenges that Gnar faces, and a lot of that is really driven by the unique geography of Moab. Squeezed between two bluffs, you have a large amount of federal lands surrounding the city that limit development potential, and the two bluffs, as I mentioned, restrict traffic flow. So we already know that people want to live in Moab. They've wanted to live there for a long time. What has the COVID-19 pandemic meant for development pressures within the city? Development has always been a huge challenge for Moab. How has that challenge been compacted by the pandemic?
Well, you called us the poster child, and so it's true. I think a lot of people have been watching us in Moab deal with the unintended consequences of just blowing up as a tourism destination, because we've got Canyonlands National Park, Arches National Parks, state parks, and crazy awesome landscape. But with respect to the coronavirus and development, it's probably worth it to mention that the coronavirus this pandemic has been a roller coaster, and the ride is certainly not over. Like, we're still experiencing, increasing case counts, and it's probably worth mentioning, that I think we're all hovering at this pretty anxious level right now. But when we look at this past year, we see that the construction industry is booming. Tourism is now booming, although a lot of us shut down in the spring, and that was a big impact. But with the construction industry booming, what we've seen in Moab is like projects are blowing up. We're building, we've got hotels that have been in the pipeline for a while that are now under construction. We've got affordable housing developments that are being actualized. The road into Moab, Highway 191. If anyone's been to Moab recently, you may have been stuck in some traffic because we're seeing that construction happening. Utah State University is finally breaking ground now on their new facility. People were stuck inside in the spring, so everyone wants to do remodels and additions. And so it's like construction is off the hook and it's great, but we are just still, reflecting on the spring closure and then the reopening and the stay safe to stay open mantra that we've been dealing with, and all of our service workers like wiping everything down all day long, working in masks, working so hard so that we provide this really safe and welcoming feeling for people that are still choosing to come to Moab. But it's been stressful, and I think every industry has been stressful. In the construction industry, you can't find a plumber to unclog a drain, let alone do big projects. So it's just every industry is feeling stressful. I will say that the spotlight has so as we have gone from this closure to this explosion of tourism, and we've just been feeling so much visitation in dealing with so much visitation, the spotlight has been now on not only the projects that we have that are actualizing this year, but also just the increase, the still needed recreation infrastructure that we don't have. Like trailheads are full. We've got a feature, Corona Arch here, that is like, everybody's got to get their selfie with Corona Arch in 2020, right? And like that parking lot is overflowing and people are parking up and down the street. And so, we've really seen progress in dealing with the impacts of visitation, but we're still seeing there's still a lot more work that we need to do to upgrade our infrastructure. And then that goes back to, so if somebody wants to move to Moab and work from home, we still have, fiber through our downtown, but we don't have broadband to our residential neighborhoods yet. So we still have a lot of work to do. Hopefully that answers your question about development.
Yeah, Emily, and you bring up an interesting point there at the end of fiber and the quality of broadband internet and how important that has been over the past several months. And I've had a couple other discussions with Gateway community leaders around the country, and for some of those where they had just coincidentally put major investments into fiber and broadband, it seems to be that really kind of greased the skids for allowing a lot of this amenity migration to happen. And maybe this is a question for all of the panelists: how much of an impact or as an influence or regulating force does broadband internet actually play in amenity migration, particularly during the past 7-8 months?
I can take a stab at that real quickly. Just for Moab, not having it in our residential, but having such a low population, we've still got pretty good internet, even if we're, in cable or DSL connection. Hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear from my home. But we definitely are motivated to improve on that.
Aaron, were you going to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in. So the city recognized this future need quite some time ago, and we have worked to create a fiber backbone of city-owned fiber that we lease out to service providers. We have the big fat pipe that kind of runs through town along the rail, and we were able to create a point of presence there and pull it in all the way through our downtown to City Hall and our emergency response folks in the county. And that strategy has worked so well, you can almost call it a crisis of success, right? We've had a couple of service providers come in and tap into that fiber and bore throughout our residential neighborhoods, and they're continuing to do that, providing synchronous up and down speeds at relatively affordable prices. And because of the low population, there's not much of a drag on the service you would get, because not a whole lot of people are tapping into it relative to a place like New York. So our internet speeds are superior to that of a lot of major tech hub cities. And that is definitely caught the attention of many remote workers.
Yeah, I completely agree, Aaron. That seems to be the similar sentiment that I've heard kind of echoed around the country. I wanted to jump to a question that we have in the Q&A. This comes from Patrick Sorfleet. He brings up this idea that if you're experiencing heightened xenophobia from locals to new residents moving in, or even visitors, how are you trying to manage the us versus them mentality? Ray, I want to direct this question to you. I've had some, I'm going to keep bringing up these anecdotal conversations I have along the way, but I've had some conversations with other folks on the west side of the Tetons, Pete, up there in your neck of the woods. And the quote that I often hear is that the California hate is very real in a lot of these Intermountain West communities. So Ray, maybe you can speak to that about whether or not these perceptions are real, and the ways that gateway communities can really help to maintain that sense of community, that small town feel that really makes them special.
I guess that's, the first question you got to ask, is perception reality at that point too? Growing up here, we were told that, you didn't want to have those outside influences. They didn't want to change the culture here. And I actually kind of grew up believing that, being, someone that moved in outside from Arizona, which was kind of counterintuitive. But this actually got challenged about a month ago, where someone had just asked, what evidence do you have to support that this exists? And I'm looking, at the community that we have here, and the new people come in. I've had an opportunity to speak with a lot of new couples as they move in. And I ask, what has been your experience, coming in? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel welcome? And it's often like, no, I really don't. I have this fear. And like, well, what has occurred, or what has happened, or what experience have you had that's made you feel uncomfortable? Well, nothing really. It's just we were told, to be careful, and we just didn't want to, express ourselves or make too much of a splash. And it really is kind of, blowing my mind that I think that the xenophobia is real, the perception is real, but the actual experience of these new folks coming in does not match. And I would honestly challenge, any of these communities that have that mentality to really check those biases at the door, and learn to, welcome these folks in and integrate them in, because a community is not, geography based or regionally based. It's people based. And the community itself is going to be built up by the people that decide to do the work. And we are like every other little community, right? You have the same 12 people on 15 different committees, doing 90% of the work. And it's real easy to get that burned out. And I just, these new folks that are coming in that, here in Thompson Falls, they want to get involved. They want to do things. They didn't come to Thompson Falls to make it a California. They came to Thompson Falls to be a Montana. And it's really important to remember that. And so it really starts with changing your conversation at home, changing your conversation that you have with people, just having a whole different mindset altogether. Yeah, I can go on and on. It's a big soapbox item for me.
Thanks, Ray. Any other follow-up from the other panelists?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I think Ray said something important. That wrote it down. He said, these are the people who are doing the work, and I think that I trust that that's true. And in Jackson, I think the perception is a little different. It's people who, you got somebody who's living in a rental home. They've been there for 10 years, working 3 or 4 jobs year round, struggling to get by, and they get a notice, and they've got 30 days to get out, and their rental home is scraped, and a $4 million house is going in. And the person who's living in that $4 million house isn't going to be washing dishes or doing construction or doing that work. And so it's just a little different in Jackson. We don't get the working class moving in there. You can't move there as a working class person and buy a house. So it's more of a class-based thing than xenophobia, but there's resentment. I mean, that resentment is real, and people are being forced to leave that have lived there a long time. And I don't know if that's the same in other communities, but in Jackson it is.
Well, in Moab, we definitely have, when you're talking to somebody or introducing yourself, like there's a pride in whether or not you were born and raised in Moab. And it might, Kaden, maybe you could speak to it. It might be a Utah thing, broader than just Moab. But I think there's, when we're looking at communities that cater to visitors, we're also going to have communities with a greater diversity of born and raised, and also, came for the climbing and hiking, and then, stayed for the lifestyle and the community that welcomed them. And so it's for at least for Moab, there is a delicate balance, and we see the friction happen when we talk about building standards or growth. There becomes this "don't change Moab" that kind of is coming from the locals, the old timers, and then no, we need to grow and accommodate, and then that usually comes from the newer residents. And so there is a real friction there. And so with this new person, this new group coming in, this Zoom town group coming in, I think we're going to see that same sort of fear of new from and then we've got, generations of new, like, oh, how long have you been here? Oh, 20 years. Oh, you're in this like local-ish category. I don't know if Kaden, if you want to speak to that, if that's what you experienced.
Oh, I think you're right, Mayor. I think maybe it is a Utah thing, but I think it's a small community thing. And I think the big thing, it's tough for me. I'm 25. I'm part of the millennial generation, and obviously a lot of change is coming, and I see a lot of change happening. And the old timers, as we call them, they mention, well, I've been here 50 so years and this has never happened. Well, it's not the 1900s anymore. We are in the virtual world, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I think, you see, and I think we're going to touch on it more later, so I won't get too into it, but you see a lot of people moving here now, and there's good things, like it's been mentioned. Those people probably aren't the working class. They're either retired or have some money that they, which a lot of the times we see them actually invest back into the community, whether that's donating to the schools or helping fund a new project or infrastructure that we need. But the downfall of it, and it happened to my wife and I, was we moved back here in 2017 and had some money saved up to purchase a home, the down payment. And we were competing with cash buyers right and left. And there's nothing you can do about that. So when you talk about trying to come back home, from somewhere that you were born and raised in, and you can't do that because you can't compete with, the non-working class and the retirees, that's a whole different ball game. So I think there's two different ends that are good and bad. But like I said, we'll talk on that later, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Kaden. I want to jump back to a point that Pete, you mentioned early on about really the nuts and bolts and how gateway communities are funded with such a large proportion of their kind of economic portfolio being driven by tourism, by outdoor recreation. A lot of the revenues that gateway communities are dependent upon come from sales tax and transient room tax. So Emily, can I direct this question to you? And a lot of these, with so much of the funding that goes to gateway communities coming from sales tax and transient room tax, and also the coinciding decline in visitation that's happened over the middle of the summer, and now obviously it's kind of rebounded, often above normal levels. How has that put cities like Moab and Jackson and the other cities that are represented on the call today in a position of having to provide their standard municipal services while having almost maybe not the most appropriate way to put it, but your legs kind of swept out from underneath you with the ability to generate revenues that in a way that you typically would?
Well, it's probably important to note that like we went from furlough to fire. It was like, you know, shut down, stay safe, flatten the curve, everything shut down, restaurants shut down, inventory spoiled. Moab City went through a RIF like many, a reduction in force. And then it was like, all right, you know, we flattened the curve. And then, you know, we start to slowly open the gates. And then it was like everybody that had been locked in the spring was like, we're going to Moab and we're going to these different tour, you know, gateway communities. And it was like, whoa, this is awesome. You know, we're freaking out about loss of sales tax from March and April. So come on down. But then it was like, oh no, we got to rehire. And do we have enough staff? And the restaurants are like, you know, what, you know, we're trying to staff up, but then as we all know too, unemployment was paying a whole lot, $600 extra a week. And so rehire was really difficult. So between the reopen and today, we've all been kind of on this like understaffed, overperforming pace. And now with case counts where they are and Thanksgiving coming up, I think everyone's just like, let's just make it to Thanksgiving. You know, let's try not to see a shutdown again. But it was a pretty big deal, and it's important to say now that like now, Moab is not, you know, not only just a gateway community, but we're super remote, and so we are 2 hours from the nearest Walmart. We do not have an ICU, and so you know, we've got a regional hospital, and so for us, we take seriously staying safe to stay open because of our remoteness and because of the lack of resources. So yeah, just going back to what you were asking about sales tax and money, it's like we've been doing what we can to rebound from a closure in the spring without kicking ourselves back into closure. So I guess anybody that's watching, that's planning on vacationing to any one of our gateway communities, you know, social distancing, masking, washing hands for sure. And tip big, because, you know, everyone's been working so hard. It's been very, very high anxiety for these tourism towns like Moab.
Now, I'd just like to ask for all of you that aren't in Montana, would you please say, you know, loud and live how important or vital it is to have at least some sort of, you know, sales tax or resort tax or any kind of tax whatsoever to help promote your region?
I don't know about promoting the region. We don't need to do that, but and I think 70% of our city's revenue is derived from sales tax, and the majority of that's paid by visitors. And we don't have a property tax in the town of Jackson, and there's no state income tax disbursements from the state. it's basically sales tax and a few other things that we get. So yeah, we need to sell things in order to keep the government going.
Thanks, Pete. Maybe that's a really good jump into one of the questions that we have open in the Q&A, and this is for all the panelists, is, what assistance from state and federal government would you like to see leveraged or implemented to help address the effects, maybe the compound effects of both amenity migration and COVID-19?
Well, we just we got through a workshop that Recreation Economies for Rural Communities, and it was a fantastic program through the EPA. And it's more of those capacity building. Anytime that you can get all the stakeholders, in the same, Zoom window, and we're all talking about, the same basic needs and having a designed action plan. I don't think, the grants are great, but just having the, a program together where it forces us all in the room to address an issue all at the same time and come up with the answers and accountability. That was just the greatest thing I think that government could provide for us.
I guess I'd say, from the feds, some reformation of income tax, the tax structure in the U.S., because what's really driving our problems is inequality. We have the highest inequality in the nation in Teton County, and it's problematic. From the state, I would say, in income tax, they can do what they want with the money, but being a tax shelter is very difficult for our community. If we had the option for a real estate transfer tax, that would help us, as would an increase in the homestead exemption, so that we could increase property taxes in the town. It's not just the county now, but also in the town, without harming some of the folks. I think the homestead exemption is about $100,000, which might get you a parking space in your garage, but doesn't really go a long way. So there are plenty of things that could be done. I just don't see the political will to do any of them because of, I don't see a whole lot of will to go out and help working class people in this country. So we're not holding our breath on that.
This is Aaron, and I suppose at the state level, one of the things that we've been keeping our eye on is our potential future authority to put on a ballot a renewal of our hotel motel occupancy tax, a lot of which goes to kind of offset the impacts to visitors to our community. A fair amount goes to our transit system, to emergency services, downtown improvements, as well as even property tax relief for existing residents. But in Idaho, if you get to a threshold of over 10,000 in population, you no longer have the authority to even put it on the ballot. So that's something that I know we're all really concerned about, because because we really do depend on that revenue from visitors to support the additional service demands that we're faced with.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I want to kind of turn it over to Kaden a little bit and stay on this track of talking about funding, not just for municipal governments, but for counties as well. Kaden, maybe this applies most directly to you. I think you had mentioned when you introduced yourself that 92% or so of Garfield County is federal land. Majority of that is under Grand Staircase, Escalante National Monument, and other significant portions being National Forest, and you mentioned the 3 national parks. One of the perpetual problems with securing funding in our communities is that many of these communities, many of these counties have large proportions of their lands that are under federal management. And many local governments, including Garfield County, have argued that PILT funding is inadequate to offset the development potential for federal lands. How has the arguably low level of PILT funding exacerbated development pressures on private lands within Garfield County?
So I wouldn't say it's exacerbated the pressures as much as it's really affected Garfield County's ability to kind of serve the public. So as you look at, what PILT can be spent on, there's emergency services in a county of 5,000 square miles. Obviously, and being the leisure and hospitality and recreation focused county that we are, we've got a lot of ambulance calls that go out. And I did the math and I just did a Google search. So from Panguitch Lake, which is an unincorporated community with several hundred cabins in the southwest corner of Garfield County, all the way to Tickaboo, which is an unincorporated community on the east end, where we see a lot of recreation happening. It is 185 miles and 4 hours and 33 minutes one way, and you never leave Garfield County. And we only have one sheriff's department in the entire county. We don't have city or municipal sheriff or law enforcement departments. That's all, here in Panguitch. And so PILT, if you look at PILT funding, it's supposed to be payment in lieu of taxes. And then if you look at the definition of in lieu of, it means the same as. I also did a little bit of research. If you look at just an unincorporated raw piece of land in Garfield County, the market value is about $1,000 an acre. And then SITLA, State Institutional Trust Lands Administration, School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, they're about $2,000 an acre. Our PILT that we get in Garfield County, most recent year we got about 910,000. And when you look at, the 92% of that is federal lands, that is 30 cents an acre that we get. So not 1,000 an acre, like private, or 2,000 like state. We get 30 cents an acre in PILT. And that money is supposed to go to infrastructure, EMS, law enforcement, et cetera. It's tough to serve the public on 30 cents an acre. And a huge problem, especially this year, it was actually in commission meeting on Monday, our public works director mentioned that the trash, the garbage by Hole in the Rock Road and some of the other outdoor recreation kind of corridors, the trash has increased about 5 times this year. And, we still have the same amount of employees like Mayor Niehaus said. We actually, at times we were looking at laying some off, and then you see the waste collection pickup and the EMS, search and rescue out in the monument is a nightmare. We actually have to get the helicopter from Iron County, which is extremely costly. And people don't take those things into account, and that's what PILT is supposed to be spent on. And we're basically getting pennies in lieu of taxes is what everybody refers it to. Yep, I just saw a comment, pennies in lieu of taxes.
Kaden, I'll share too that we're talking a lot about PILT right now, and there's good momentum behind demanding more. But I think it's also important when we talk about PILT to also talk about how valuable our public lands are to us as gateway communities. I love my public lands, love them. And so I fear that the conversation around PILT sometimes gets steered in a direction of maybe we should privatize, land, the privatization. And, we are successful economically as gateway communities because of the protection of our public lands, whether they are federal or state. But that it is true that we are just not, it's becoming an economic issue. And so I am hopeful that the conversation around PILT doesn't move us away from, toward a conversation about ownership, but instead we stay very laser focused as this cohort and of gateway communities and say, we would just like to have a conversation about more from PILT.
I agree. And I think in regards to PILT, I think it's the formula that, maybe needs some work, not necessarily like you mentioned, the land ownership, because yeah, we love our public lands too. We just don't love the PILT formula.
Pete, maybe we can follow up with you. You've been pretty active in this arena lately. You, along with lawmakers from Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, Utah, and Washington State, that about covers the entire West, signed a letter to Congress asking them to add gateway community dividend to the PILT program. Can you tell us a little bit more about that addition and how it would work and how it's being advanced through Congress?
Sure. My understanding is that that would have a premium, I think a 50% increase for gateway communities. I'm not as familiar with PILT. I mean, we obviously, the county gets funding from it. The town, I don't believe, does, but it's a relatively small amount for us. You know, we don't look at that as a way that we're, you know, any increase that's within the possible range of outcomes is not really going to affect our budgets in a meaningful way. I mean, we'll take the money. We think it's important. We do have costs associated. I think Kaden was talking about search and rescue. That's a big thing for us with the national forests. You know, the park does a lot of work in the park, but there are things, you know, there are just costs associated with being with having a lot of public land in your jurisdiction. And getting that a little more accurate, I think, would be important. But I agree with Emily that we should not be looking at this as, you know, well, what would it be if if this was private property and subject to property taxes? Because I don't want to go down that road. I'd like to just keep this conversation to what, you know, what's the right formula for us to be able to deal with the impacts of having public land in the jurisdiction, and keep it at that. But I think the formula could be improved.
Thanks, Pete. Aaron, I want to kind of shift the discussion a little bit and maybe start to think about the unique positions that a planner finds themselves in. I know we have oriented the Nar Initiative to really help gateway planning, and a lot of that in our communities often falls to people in positions like yourself, where you are really being responsible for planning out and developing the vision, or at least coordinating that vision for the community. We have several elected officials on the position on the call today, and you are in a slightly different position. So how do you feel that your position as a planner, and maybe other planners like yourself, put you in the opportunity or put you in the position where you have an obligation to provide space, or to provide to accommodate the development needs of the community, but also the need to do that in a way that's smart and sustainable in the long run, knowing what you know about what the community actually needs. So how do you walk that tightrope of needing to accommodate growth, but also wanting to do it in a way that's smart and sustainable?
So that is a big question. So let me do my best to answer it as concisely as possible. So it starts with a community vision, right? And that's encapsulated typically in a comprehensive plan. But then you really need to take that plan and implement it, typically in the form of zoning codes and subdivision codes, right? And that's really where the rubber hits the road. And so it's through really intentional code writing and adoption supported by the community's vision. It's always got to tie back to that community vision. And that in itself takes a lot of work, a lot of authentic and robust community engagement. And it also takes really working on a day-to-day level with developers, with property owners, communicating that vision, not just what the codes allow you to do or don't allow you to do, but really setting up projects for success before a board such as the Planning Commission or City Council. You know, there's a lot that can go into a lot that should go into a community's vision, you know, or a community plan, and the codes. A lot that it's a role of a planner to help provide perspective on and information for, such as, you know, how we grow, if we grow, and what that looks like. So our strategy has been up to now from our 2009 plan to really focus on infill development. But we're getting to the point now where we're going to have to expand. And that's really a tricky conversation in Idaho for various reasons. And, you know, one of the things that really comes to light that it's a role of a planner to kind of shed that light on is wildfire risk and growing out into the WUI, the urban wildland interface. And if we do have to do that, how do we do it in a way that's responsible and sustainable? And by sustainable, we mean environmentally, but also economically and equitably, right? There's people think of sustainable and they sometimes just latch on to the environmental portion of it, but it really is about the economy and equity. And I also rope in fiscal responsibility into that, making sure that long-term, growth of the long-term can be adequately served. I think I may have answered your question, but it's a big one.
Yeah, and maybe I'll follow up on that question, Aaron. I think we're in a very unique time now where the drive for amenity migration is happening at a very fast pace, and often at a pace Emily had mentioned is outpacing or outracing the ability of local developers to keep up with that. As a planner, do you find yourself in a unique position now, or is there anything that planners can do to really capitalize on this window? We've had some anecdotal discussion. I think it might have came up on one of the previous webinars, and it came from your area of the country, Ray, where housing development is booked out like 2.5 years in advance for a lot of the Flathead Valley. So as a planner, is there anything that you can do to take advantage of this unique window, or is the bun already in the oven as far as the development trajectory of what COVID has kind of unleashed on gateway communities?
So if I hear you correctly, you're suggesting that there's kind of a window, a lull of opportunity where where there's not development happening, and we haven't seen that here. We are going full speed ahead. I mean, it was a lot to even commit to this webinar, frankly, because I have staff reports due for multiple applications for subdivisions, multifamily conditional use permits, and it's frankly it's things that the housing, a variety of housing types is desperately needed by our community right now as a result of I mean, these were trends that already were in place. This pandemic has only accelerated them, particularly with amenity migration. So and at the same time, we're trying to update our 2009 plan. So we're in this unenviable position of trying to plan for the future, where the future is totally in question, while at the same time trying to get development applications through. So that's sort of the climate of development and planning for us right now. It's full steam ahead.
We have a weird situation here. I mean, this is, again, rural Montana, Highway 200. You have to really want to come here or to know where we're at. It's not very convenient to find us. And we just wrapped up a housing needs assessment because we have that workforce, housing situation like everybody else does. But I'm looking at it, we just published it. And in 10 years, our growth was, we increased by about 200 people in 10 years. We have increased, threefold that in 4 months. Yeah, we don't know. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to do. And we are already dealing with, infrastructure situations that had been pretty much kicked down the road as was. We already have all of our homes up on a hillside above a reservoir are on individual septics. And that blows my mind. And so we're already having to deal with the housing situation beforehand. And now with this on top of it, I don't think that there's a book or a guide for us to draw off of just yet.
Yeah, and van life's about to get really real this winter. It's chilly living out of a van. I was just going to share that Moab's vision for 20 years was tourism. And then we achieved that vision of, the former leaders of Moab. And it's been amazing, but there've been some real unintended consequences. And so now it's, we talk about this new vision, but we're all like exhausted with coronavirus, fatigue, that we're just like, how can you even talk about vision, when you've got like applications and all kinds of other things you gotta, it's still a little triage. So when I hear people talk about vision, I'm exhausted. I don't, we can't even think forward, but we do have to. And I am always drawn, when I think about vision of tomorrow, when I think about, this idea of a Zoom town, how can we open ourselves up to new, a diversified economy in a way that's regenerative. So as a gateway community, we have, the economic side of sustainability is that our system gets flashed with cash, like a flash flood, but cash flood, where people come in, spend money, it flashes, and then they leave, and then that leaves. And so there's this, how do you stop the flash flooding and diversify, and there could be some real opportunities with this notion of being Zoom towns, being a place where people want to play when they recreate, but also a place where people want to recreate, live where they can recreate. But the housing is going to be the biggest piece to that for sure. And I will say that, when Moab boomed as a uranium town, before it boomed as a tourism town, a lot of single wide trailers, a lot of temporary housing were brought into the community and still exist today as our failing housing infrastructure, and exist as our affordable housing because it's falling apart. And then, like Pete, what you're saying, homes are getting torn down and new homes are getting built. Housing is such a big deal, and it is going to be our crux. And hopefully what we're building also is so uniquely regenerative that it's harvesting the sun to run for the energy, and harvesting the water from the rooftop to offset water use, and utilizing landscaping for food production. All those groovy things that we talk about, we can put into standards for development. But then there's that political will piece and the expense of that as well. That's going to be complicated. But I see that as a future vision for all of us. It's just even exhausting saying it today because, of the pandemic. But I'm hopeful.
To help prevent some of that, that bleed or that flash, something that we've been pushing here is actually, the workforce training for some of our best and brightest students at the high school level. We teamed up with the university, our local community colleges, and are developing the skills necessary for them to do remote work and stay here all at the same time. And we're generating a little bit of buzz with it, and it's been really, really nice because a lot of these, we live in heaven. This place is absolutely gorgeous. And the only reason why someone needs to leave, and if you ask the seniors, is that because they need opportunity, and they just have the mindset that there isn't an opportunity here. So if we can kind of create that opportunity, then they stick around, and then that money just stays here and regenerates and grows. But like you, we need a place for them to stay.
Yeah, I think Ray and Kaden and Aaron are the keys to this, not to knock on the elected officials, but we're often in and out in a couple of 4 years, and having a community development director whose job it is to take that community vision and see it through. It's a very different job than a town manager that's very tactical and deals with the operational perspective. But, it's being able to strategize on that long-term vision is I think beyond the ability of most elected bodies that are part-time. I know a lot of us are from small communities and we're not, full-time as mayors or elected officials. It's very difficult. So hats off to you guys, because you guys are going to have to carry that forward and focus on that vision, that long-term vision, because it's really easy to get sidetracked with, for us, I'm sure it's the same for Emily. We get calls every day about, everyone's calling when the case count goes up and the case count goes down, or a house gets torn down, or and it's we act very reactively as elected officials a lot of time. We have to. That's kind of our job, but it's so important to have somebody whose job it is to maintain that focus on the comp plan and the long-term community vision.
Thanks, Pete. Aaron, we got a question in the Q&A that I think would be particularly targeted towards yourself, and maybe the other panelists can weigh in on it as well. Has the amenity migration process, has it led to a disproportionate or a variable level of growth across your city, and has that growth happened in the places that you want it to? So the panelist, or the attendee brings up this idea of, is it happening infill in towns, or is it sprawling into outer areas? Do you have, what's that impact been in the levels of, in the areas that you want it to be, or is it in the areas that you want it to be, or has it been skewed towards one type of growth or another?
So speaking for Sandpoint, we have a pretty small footprint in our city limits, and there's limited options for the city to grow, to annex beyond in the state of Idaho. And it takes real participation with the county and county residents in what's called our area of city impact, and agreements there too. And we're just about to start on those discussions, which can be, very difficult discussions to have. So right now we are primarily the growth has happened in the city. And, in terms of, kind of what I talked about with sustainability, there's existing services to them for the most part. There's existing roads, there's some existing pipes. When a new subdivision goes in, for example, you have to, we like to think about taking on all that additional maintenance responsibilities relative to the tax base you're going to get from it, right? And what is the other mix of uses, such as commercial, which has typically a higher return on investment because it doesn't take as much services than residential development. And not all residential development is created equally. So, kind of touching on, that's, I think, one of the biggest concerns of the community are we going to be able to handle this growth without sprawling out and jeopardizing what Emily talked about, is the surrounding area, the beauty of the area, which really is one of our biggest economic drivers, has been for a long time. And the real question is, for us right now, it's not whether we're going to grow, it's how are we going to grow that maintains those community values. And it's a real intentional process to drill down and understand what those values are and how they're reflected in the built environment, right? The traditional neighborhood development patterns, the traditional downtown. What can you put in place to can not only protect what's there now, but continue that pattern if that's what people value going forward? And the associated benefits, such as the walkability, the better ability to serve, other multimodal transportation options, and just overall success of places like that economically, as well as the protection of the areas outside. And, I think it's a real journey in finding common ground when we go into these negotiations with outside city limits, because I think there's a lot of common ground to be discovered. I think there's often a perception that there isn't, the city versus out in the county residents. But, my perception is just anecdotal, is that the folks in the city want to protect the rural character in the county just as much as the people in the county want to protect the rural character in the county, and want to also maintain the small town traditional development pattern of cities. And so that's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of what we're just about to really engage in a very intentional and meaningful way that could have long-term impact. So we'll see how it goes.
Aaron, I think you your answer underscores a lot of the themes that have come up today, and really highlighting the need for partnerships across municipal governments, county governments, nonprofit organizations, and really the buy-in of multiple positions, multiple kind of key leaders across these agencies. Maybe we could have the panelists weigh in, and you can all discuss the key characteristics, or what have you experienced has been least of the most successful partnerships or collaborations, or just initiating that discussion across your different constituents in the broader region. I know Pete and Emily, a lot of the growth and development challenges that you have faced in the past and now being faced by communities that are 10, 20 miles away, maybe a lot farther than that. So what are the key things that you have seen that have been really successful for initiating those discussions, or putting in place plans or working groups that allow municipal governments to work with county governments, to work with nonprofit organizations, and to all get them at least talking to one another?
I guess I'll go first. I found one of the most interesting things. So Garfield County, as you mentioned when you kind of gave our intro, we're kind of smack in the middle of South Central Utah, and one of our neighboring counties is San Juan County. But it's interesting, San Juan County is actually one of the furthest drives from Garfield County. I'm actually closer to Mare and Moab than I am to, say, Natalie Randall, in Monticello. So actually to get to Monticello, you have to go through Moab. But what Natalie Randall and I have done is we meet weekly, virtually, obviously. And it started with the Hope Corps intern through the Hope Corps program. And now we've just continued to pay him with CARES Act dollars. But we've been able to implement things like starting a business website, and actually he has completely administered some of our CARES Act grant programs for businesses. And so I think it's, like I said, I know that we don't like to think that these virtual meetings are a thing. And now we're talking about the cancellation of UAC here in Utah that was supposed to happen next week. And a lot of people are upset because a lot of times you don't get as much from virtual as you do from in person, but you have to be innovative in times like this. And just because we're closer to Washington County here in Utah, which has St. George, than say San Juan, doesn't mean that that's, a lot of the times the conversations that we should be having. There are places in not only Utah, but I'm finding, listening to the other panelists, I see a lot of the same things, as Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. And I think it's these conversations, Jordan, that you're putting together that really are helping me and open my eyes on, good ideas and maybe things that we aren't doing that we should be.
I'd love to just say, like, Kaden, that's the lemonade of this pandemic for me. Like, so it may not be, Jordan, it's not quite partnership, but it is the fact that in this rural remote community, everybody is forced to be online right now. And so I've had legislators for my state in my living room with me, virtually, of course, but that was, it was so hard to get that kind of attention before. And so the fact that we've all been forced to move online has created the opportunity to connect in a different way. And so, Kaden, to hear you talk about your relationship with Natalie Randall, like, that has been the lemonade of this pandemic. And I feel like I've been able to develop partnerships and deepen my relationships with different people throughout the state. And even, nationally, because of everyone being forced to move online. And I don't know how unique Moab is in terms of a gateway community for our remoteness, but I suspect we're all still pretty remote. And when it's time to, go to the state capitol because of laws that affect, our taxing, ability, things like that, like, we're more connected now than we have been. And for me, that is the lemonade. And depending on where you live, you might add something to your lemonade.
Well, what it's forced me to, strengthen those relationships that we currently have, as part of a community development. We're the fourth largest county in the state, and we only have about 5 or 6 communities, about 11,500 people spread out all over this place. So most of the decisions and most of the things that happen are not done by the city. They're done by the community organizations. And those are the people that I go talk to. Those are the meetings that I try to be a part of. And you listen to what their needs are, and you listen to what their barriers are. And it's created some opportunities that would not have occurred otherwise. So I'm a little grateful to that end, but I want to say that very carefully.
I would add, like, obviously working together is extremely important and often necessary, especially if you're a city council working with a board of county commissioners. You sometimes don't have a choice. You have to do it, and that means you better get good at it. But one of the things that I've found over the last 4 years is that we, as part-time electeds, and I don't know, Emily, if you are as well, but these things take a lot of time, and we do talk about working together. But to me, part of that is, focus on the big things where you have to work together. We spend a lot of time jointly managing departments, for example, which means that we have to spend a lot of time with 10 people in a room instead of 5. And I can tell you, it's not twice as hard to get to a decision with 2 bodies of 5 as it is with 1 body of 5. It's about 100 times harder. And so I think it's really important to be efficient with that, just given the limited bandwidth. We're all burned out because of a pandemic, but frankly, a lot of us were burned out before that. And we should focus on that. And I really think local governments tend to spend a lot of time on the kind of easy and not important things because they're easy, and we can make a decision and move through them really quickly. And the things that take time, where we do have to work together, it's hard to find the time to do that. And that means being efficient. And it means when you do need that you don't do it unless you need to. And then when you need to, you better put the time in and do it right. So a lot of it to me just comes back to, the efficiency of elected officials and the ability to get to a decision. It's hard. It's something we all have to work on. It's, I'm sure, very frustrating to the community development directors in the room.
Well, maybe that leads us into a great question to wrap up on is, we've talked a lot about planning, the essential need for kind of proactive planning, but it faces all these barriers and constraints. And really, when you think about the American West and the gateway communities, they're one of the last vestiges of this idea of the frontier, and they're built upon individualism and people moving there to kind of make their own mark. To what extent do you feel that you've seen this response to planning and need to develop smart growth strategies really be seen as a negative, and that planning is an actual bad word, or it's not seen as something that is really going to actually lead to anything? What are the ways that planners or that attitude can either be overcome or mitigated or completely worked around?
Well, I can show you a tale of 2 communities. Thompson Falls, that has had a growth policy and a planning in place, and our new parks, our new trail systems, and then our neighbor then to the east, who does not, and you haven't seen a whole lot of new things happen. I mean, you have to do it. It's important to have a vision. It's important to engage the community. And then it's imperative to have those things in place if you want to find the funding to make it happen.
This, Aaron, I have a follow-up thought to that. And it really kind of goes back to, and one of the reasons why I love working in local government, because it's about the issues that affect people in their daily lives, right? And they're also the issues in which people can have the most input on. And it's really got to be rooted in those community values. It's not about some outside agenda. It's about what matters to the community in which you're serving. And as long as, the codes and the plans are rooted in that, it really isn't even relevant to talk about, any kind of the newest planning buzzword, whether it's smart growth or Zoom towns or what have you. It's really got to be about what the community vision is. I mean, that's just it.
Emily or Pete?
Sure. We've had a comp plan since '94. We updated it in 2012, and we just finished updating it again last month. It's, we don't have a problem with people saying we shouldn't have a comp plan. That's not a thing here. I think the benefits of it have been really obvious over the last 25 years or so. Where we have a robust discussion, I guess, would be about what does the comp plan mean and how will you update it? And I think that's good. I think the framing is not whether or not we should plan, whether we should have a strategic plan for our community's future. It's what does it look like? And I think that's a good place to be. But I would say as you're setting those up or as you update them, what you do need to do, the really important thing is to actually get out there and listen to people and make sure that you have input from people, because it's going to always be a compromise. And the most important thing, or where you'll really lose people, is when they feel like they didn't have a voice at the beginning of the process and they weren't heard at the beginning of the process, and then that things changed on them at the end of the process. So you have to commit to listening to them and then following through on what you heard at the end of it. But if you could do that, it's the greatest thing ever. It makes your decisions. You rezone the town and you pull up the comp plan. You say, what was the comp plan tell us to do here? And then you're just you're playing around with the edges and at the tactical level about how to implement that. But the vision is already there. It makes things a lot easier.
I'll just say in Moab, like I was saying before, I think we're at a place where plans have changed, where we've been working so hard toward tourism, and now we feel full and we feel like we haven't done enough to diversify our economy. And so we're stabbing with like littler plans at the way in which we shift the bigger picture. So we've got, an affordable housing plan, we're doing a transportation plan, we're kind of doing these littler plans as opposed to like the big vision push. And my council has been talking about a vision process for a while. I think where we get stuck is like what we were talking about at the beginning of the call, like the old versus new, or even the medium versus new. And it's really difficult to actually know what the next step is going to be for a little city like Moab. And the idea of us coming together, especially this year where we've been driven apart with this pandemic, with the how do I say it nicely, just the rhetoric from federal politics that have been toxic, that toxicity and the division that we feel within our country. It's like, people aren't even waving to their neighbors, let alone sitting down and go through a vision process. But yeah, we're at a crossroads, and I would say for those of us that are maybe the more mature gateway communities, we have a lot of work to do. And I do agree that a new vision is important. So I guess stay tuned on what that looks like. But I do think that it's going to include this idea of workers working from home. And what does a new downtown look like for that type of resident? And what are the services for that new type of resident? That's something that we're all gateway communities are going to have to accommodate, because that's what we're seeing.
Well, thanks so much, Emily. I think that's a great way to cap off the discussion. We've dug into a lot of substantive, meaty topics that a lot of small rural and gateway communities are dealing with all over the West, and it still feels like we are just still at the beginning of looking to find some concrete answers. So I really do appreciate all the panelists willing to share their insights today. I think a lot of other gateway communities around the West will benefit from hearing the chat and from hearing the discussion and participating today. I'm just going to plug one final reminder for the other 2 sessions that we do have as part of the Amenity Migration series. We have a session on November 19th. It looks like my screen sharing is not going to work right now, but that's fine. We'll just wing it. The November 19th session looks at 2 communities in Montana, one that is currently going through massive amounts of growth and one that is going through rapid population declines. And we'll hear from a consulting group that is working with both communities to identify solutions across those communities. So that session's on November 19th, and the final session is December 3rd, which is a peer-to-peer learning session that's going to be facilitated by the Gnar team. And that's an opportunity for community planners, local community residents, local leaders to actually share what they've learned through the series, identify mutual solutions that haven't really been dug into yet, and really provide that venue for that to happen. So with that, I'll just say again, thank you to all of our panelists and everybody that was able to make it today. And as a reminder, we'll post this video back up to the Gnar website, and we'll also send it out in a reminder to everybody who registered. So Pete, Emily, Aaron, Kaden, and Ray, thank you so much for joining us today.